Homeschooling. Good idea? Bad idea? What about socialization? I mean, what about the advanced courses that you can take? What about sports? What about music? What about science labs? What about socialization? Again, because that always gets asked again. So we decided that today we're going to sit down and we're going to give you the top 10 reasons you shouldn't homeschool. You're going to want to pay attention to these, right? Because we homeschooled, so we know what we're talking about. And we're going to let you in on some little secrets that the homeschool cabals don't want to tell you about what could happen if you choose to homeschool. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers. Now, as always, I am your host, Nick Freitas. With us in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then we have our resident historian and political prognosticator, Christian Hines.
Oh, sorry. It's my line. I'm
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to this episode because we've been talking a lot about like Doom lately, which look, I mean, you know, I love me some Doom, right?
What makes you think we're not going to talk about Doom?
We are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the
these
Doom.
are the reasons why you shouldn't homeschool.
That's right. That's right. The National Education Association is going to love this episode because I'm just going to validate all of the concerns that they commonly mention. Before we jump into that, I would encourage all of you to maybe check out our community, our online community in Circle. It's there on the show notes page. Again, a lot of the episode ideas that we get come from that community. Also, if you kind of like some of what we're doing, maybe subscribe. Again, we're not going to force you to. No coercion here. Just something you could do. Might be nice. Okay, let's lay the groundwork. Now, who am I to talk about education, much less homeschooling? Well, let me give you a little bit of background, a little bit of credentialing here. I know how important that is for education. So when it comes to like generalized understanding of like education as a concept, as education policy, legislation, things of that nature, I have served now for 3 years. Next will be my 4th year on the education committee in a state legislature here in the Virginia House of Delegates. And I've actually been the chairman of the subcommittee on higher education. So I've dabbled a little bit on the legislative side and kind of the broader policy side of education and what makes for a good educational system and or systems. Also, in addition to that particular experience, I've also homeschooled my children. And when I say I've homeschooled my children, what I mean is that Tina has homeschooled our children, and I have largely taken credit for all of that effort, right? Because patriarchy. That's right.
That's not true.
That's how we do it.
No, this was a joint effort.
No, we've educated We've homeschooled all 3 of our kids. Now, our kids did do some time in the public school system.
Just a year and a half.
Pun intended. No, they did do some time in the public school system. But so we have a 21-year-old, so she's obviously long graduated. We have an 18-year-old who's about to graduate this year.
Yeah,
and we have
just graduated.
He just graduated. And then we have a 16-year-old that's obviously going to be graduating soon. So we've kind of gone through this process. We've used online programs. We've used curriculums at the home. We've done everything for setting up our own little classroom at home to being something a little bit more independent. We've utilized homeschool co-ops, tutors. I've actually taught at a homeschool co-op, which Tina also helped me with, where I taught a few subjects there 1 day a week. So it was an interesting model. So that's our credentials, our experience, in case you were wondering why we have any authority to speak on this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you we're going to pull back the curtain and we're going to give you the top 10 reasons you shouldn't homeschool. Now, reason number 1, and this is important, and I feel like this is something that the various public school advocacies have really tried to clarify, and it goes like this. If you homeschool, your children are, statistically speaking, far less likely to become ungrateful communists. That's just true. I have 3 kids, and all the kids that I've taught, that our kids have interacted with in homeschool programs, I venture to say that almost none of them have become ungrateful communists. Like not one. When you compare that to the public school system, I mean, the public school system has definitely produced some ungrateful communists, especially when you get into higher ed. I mean, they've almost got the market cornered on it.
They've had unmatched success in that area.
I mean, it's incredible. When I think about all of the missed opportunities that we had to turn our kids into ungrateful communists, I feel like a failure.
Right.
Yeah. What were you doing, Nick?
So, okay, in my defense,
it's 2024. Every kid nowadays has to come out of the school system being like workers of the world unite, despite the fact that none of them are actually workers and they're all blue-haired, furry feminists.
Well, that's probably part of the problem here is that our kids, as part of their education, actually did two things. One, they got jobs, and two, they usually engaged in some sort of like entrepreneurial venture or did like internship work, including paid internship work with entrepreneurs. And so it was crazy that I think what happened, I think this is where we screwed up. Screwed up. Instead of holding our kids back from ever engaging in any sort of like, I don't know, effective exchange where they traded their labor for, basically the capital product and storefront and everything else that a business owner had produced, instead of like holding them back from them and then just constantly battering them with a caricature of what a boss would look like or a landlord would look like or an entrepreneur would look like, we actually encourage them to gain that experience for themselves. And what happened is that they learned that the nice lady that owned the coffee shop that they worked at, or the nice man that owned the, DJ business, like what they learned was they're not horrible human beings that are trying to desperately exploit me for my labor. They're actually providing me an opportunity and education and money in exchange for agreed upon services. And so, yeah, if you're going to grow up in a world where, oh my gosh, I work hard and I get more money and I get more opportunities, you're probably not going to be as convinced that, I don't know, an economic theory designed by a guy that never held down a job a day in his life and constantly exploited the people that did happen to do any sort of services for him and then lived off of his parents' wealth and the wealth of friends, Karl Marx, you're probably going to come to the conclusion that maybe that guy was just kind of a lazy punk. Maybe
he definitely was, but
yeah.
I actually have a couple of questions. I don't think I'm going to maybe ask one every single point, but as the only one who's sitting here with a mic in front of me that doesn't have kids and isn't married, but is in the age range where like, well, I could get married if I ever actually left my house.
Yeah, that's an important component. I'm just going to say that right now.
I'm also a product of the public school system, though. I went to public school my entire life, and then I went to college, and then I did the shocking thing, and I went back and got a master's, and they couldn't turn me into a ungrateful communist. But I do think that there's a lot of people in our audience that are listening to us that might ask some of these similar questions, especially if they're in my age range.
Yeah.
Where they're going to be like, the ultimate question, at least for this point, is why do you think it is, and I have a feeling why, but like, why do you think it is that homeschooled kids tend to not be, now probably some of them do, but tend to not be as ungrateful communists or become ungrateful communists as much as those who are going into the public school system?
Well, so again, one of the things, so a lot of this has to do with obviously the ideology of the parents, right? But I also think when you look at the way that the public school system has been organized, it is designed for the mass production of education. Now, whenever we talk about this, but you're bashing teachers and you're bashing administrators. First of all, anytime someone gives a critique of the public school system, if someone immediately responds with, why do you hate teachers? They're probably a perfect example of another problem with the public education system, which is it can't seem to suffer any sort of criticism whatsoever without coming to the conclusion that you hate teachers. When in reality, what we have a problem with is this idea that, okay, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to gather everybody up based off of their relative age group and their geography, right, their address, and then we're going to put them all in this room, and they're going to spend the vast majority of their day in this room, and they're going to, and a vast majority of their day with those students and with this teacher, and we're going to go through all these different subject matter, and maybe some students excel, maybe some students don't do very well. We'll do what we can to accommodate that, but at the end, we're going to determine whether or not you learned anything or whether it's beneficial based off of the standardized test that we're going to give you. Right? Okay. Like I think it's fair to criticize that model, but to your question on why does that sometimes translate into, well, we need more government power. Obviously, we're being hyperbolic when we say ungrateful communists, right? That's not usually coming out of the elementary school, right? You got to wait till like high school and higher ed before they become truly ungrateful communists. In the meantime, what they're being taught is the school provides everything, right? Especially when you're looking at things like not just the education component, but free and reduced lunches and breakfasts. And now they're talking about sending food home with kids. And they're talking, I've seen plans where they're trying to increase the amount of like medical services that you get through your school. So what it's doing is it's teaching the child that the government, right? Because the government is the one that administers and runs the school. The government is the one that feeds me, that educates me, that takes care of me, that provides socialization,
cradle to grave,
that provides interaction. Like the government does all these things.
Right.
And if something isn't going the way it should, it must be because the government doesn't have enough power or money.
To expand upon that just a little bit, we did have a year and a half where our kids were in public school. And during that time, I believe Luke was in second grade. And I remember him coming home and being very sad. And he wanted to bring some food to school for his teacher, because the teacher was talking about how little teachers get paid and how the government really needs to put more money into education so that they don't have to struggle so much. And she had laid it on so thick. And I'm not saying that teachers are paid what they're worth necessarily. What I am saying is that's not something to talk to the kids about. If you're not being paid, compensated appropriately, that's something to talk to those that you're working with about, or working for about, or even whatever officials have power over that. You don't
call your legislator.
You don't talk to a second grader and have that second grader wanting to bring food from his home to feed you. That's inappropriate. And so this idea that sometimes teachers don't have a lot to do with, this or that way of thinking that is not true. We witnessed it firsthand. We watched Luke get all sad.
Yeah.
And, and by the way, the same teacher also would shame kids in front of the other kids about whether they missed some schoolwork or this or that. If they missed some school, she would. So I'm not saying that all teachers do this, but we had a very bad situation with that one.
Oh, we literally have family that are public school teachers, counselors, the whole deal, and they're great and they do a hard job. But if the question is why this idea, let's say instead of communism, let's say toward collectivism or greater government power. Well, again, if at a very early age, some of the most influential authority figures that you have in your life are essentially government employees at a government organization or institution that are increasingly being responsible for providing you all of these things. And let me tell you this, the moment you question a free and reduced lunch program at a school, you are just treated like you are a horrible human being. You want children to starve. I remember pointing out to this one person that was asking me about it. They're like, how could you have a problem with the school sending, food home on the weekends or during the summers even in order to help these hungry children? And I finally looked at her and I said, do you know how many programs we have in order to ensure that everybody can have groceries? Do you know how many programs? She had no idea. I went through the process. Like, you look at all these various programs between EBT and other forms of assistance and WIC and all. Mm-hmm. There is no reason a child should be showing up to school hungry. There is no reason a child should be going home and not having access to any food. We put billions of dollars every year into these programs. So if they're not, then here's my question to you. Why are you hiding child abuse through the school system? Right. If you've really got this just epidemic of all of these children coming in unable to eat unless the school feeds them, then I've got some really strong questions for the parents that are taking advantage of these programs and apparently not using it to feed their child.
Right.
Now, the response back will be like, well, that shouldn't be the teacher's problem. They need a well-fed student. But sure. Granted, I agree with all that. The problem is that once again, you're not addressing where the problem really lies. You're just trying to put a Band-Aid over it on over here. And in the meantime, what you're again teaching this child is, my parents don't educate me. My parents don't take care of me. My parents aren't the most formative people within my life. My parents don't feed me. The government does. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know why they end up naturally having this environment, well, of course the government should do X, Y, and Z. It's because more and more, that's what the public school system has become responsible for.
And because there is no accountability in that area, because our kids went to a school where it was 70% free and reduced. 70% of the students were free and reduced lunch. we did not qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we paid a certain amount for school lunches if I didn't pack a lunch. And boy, we had a couple of times where I just forgot to go and fill back up the lunch account. And our kid was handed this little like ham sandwich and a milk. And that was all they were allowed to get. And they were also still charged for it, put us in a deficit on the school lunch. And of course, it was my responsibility to fill that up. I made a mistake. Yeah. And I understand them giving him a reduced, make sure he's fed, but a reduced lunch for that purpose. However, all these other kids, regardless of whether or not their parents have paid a dime and whose parents probably qualify for every other benefit under the sun, those kids get the full lunch. So what we're telling kids is we're basically punishing the ones whose parents can go ahead and feed them. And we're rewarding the ones who are not feeding their kids. And I went and had lunch with Luke one time in their cafeteria. And I was absolutely shocked at the number of kids that threw away unopened packages that they had gotten for lunch. So there were like chips and yogurts and puddings and things like that. They had their little tray. They ate a couple of bites off of the tray and they dumped the rest of the tray. I'm telling you, I saw so many kids doing this. There were unopened bags of chips, unopened
the amount of waste is incredible.
Yogurt and everything else. And it's because nobody is making a connection between somebody's hard work and that food. And at home, we tell our kids, you don't waste your food, only take what you need because we don't want you dumping it. And so if you're not that hungry, don't take it all. And it's just amazing to me, the entire mindset shift. And I don't know, I kind of feel like the situation should be flipped. Give them a basic lunch.
Well, let's not even get into that. Let's not even get into what you give or don't give. Let's get into this. I think the thing you said earlier was one of the most important takeaways about this, because it goes back to the original question of like the whole, communism or collectivism or government power. If you don't have any connection between the work that is actually necessary in order to produce the good or the service that you're receiving, and you just get it, and you're told you're entitled to it, and you're told you should have it, and you're told this is rightfully yours, with again, no acknowledgement for what it actually took on behalf of someone else to provide it. And in the end, all you think is, oh, well, how did this meal come about? Because the nice politicians voted for me to have it and the mean ones didn't. Well, okay, that's a very perverse way to look at the world. And again, what it doesn't develop gratitude, it develops a sense of entitlement. And the longer you go on within a system being told that sense of entitlement that you have is not only okay, but that it's justice, it's equity, it's all of these other things, and you want to align yourself with the people who believe in justice and equity, right? Well, then it's not hard to see what happens when they get out of it. But speaking of that, when it comes to meals and whatnot, if you do want to properly appreciate the time and effort it goes into creating a truly delicious meal, then you're going to want to check out GoodRanchers.com, because Good Ranchers is all about bringing people together, and this time for the dads. That's right. Anyone here that has a dad that you want to do something special for this Father's Day, because keep something in mind. If it wasn't for dads out there, you all just would have been lame back rubs. All right. Just keep that in mind. So now in a show of appreciation for your father and the hard work that he has done, Good Ranchers has a Father's Day gift. It's called the King Box. Now I'm going to describe what is actually in this one-time offer. This is a one-time purchase offer for dad on Father's Day. Here it goes. Ready? It's packed with 2 thick-cut bone-in ribeyes, 4 center-cut filet mignons, and 2 thick-cut bone-in New York strips. That's the King Box, right? That's what you get for Father's Day. I'm a father. I'm a dad. I'm telling you, this would be a home run. This would be a home run right here. So go to GoodRanchers.com, use promo code Nick, check out the King Box. Also, I'm not even going to go into detail on this. I'm just going to tell you something else. At GoodRanchers.com, they have something called free bacon for life. Yeah, go check out that. All right, GoodRanchers.com, promo code Nick. Go check it out. All right, let's move on to our second point. So the second point that I have, with respect to one of the things that you're essentially going to be giving up if you homeschool, right? This is going to be an experience that your kids will probably, well, let's just say this. The chances of this happening to them are going to be decreased exponentially if you homeschool. And that is that if you have a daughter, they're going to be far, far less likely, like minuscule odds, that they will be assaulted in the girls' bathroom by a boy pretending to be a girl. It turns out, like we have two girls and a boy. It turns out zero instances at the homeschool co-op, on the online, and zero instances of our daughters ever being assaulted by a boy pretending to be a girl in their spaces. Yeah, that just didn't happen.
But Nick, this never happens. Oh, wait a second.
I'm old enough to remember. When I said once, I was like, let me get this straight. You're going to tell a whole bunch of like, puberty, boys going through puberty and whatnot, that if they pretend to be a girl, they can go into the girls' locker room, and you don't think there's going to be any problems with this. You don't think there's going to be any issues. And the number of leftists were like, this is ridiculous. You're just projecting. Well, I guess we know what you would have done. I'm like, no, I'm just pointing out that you're going to have a potential problem here with somebody that could operate like a predator, operate like someone that wants to, assault or force themselves onto a girl.
Because predators go to soft targets, and you've created soft targets.
Which last time I checked, wasn't it the left informing us all that institutions of higher education, their numbers, not mine, their numbers, 1 in 4 women at a university will be assaulted at some time during their university. So let me get this straight. The absolute bastion of left-wing ideology, tolerance, inclusion, equity, all of that stuff. At those institutions, it's 1 in 4. And now you're going to implement a model within our school system, which says that if a boy says, I'm a girl, they now get to go in and go into the women's locker rooms. I mean, which is it? Are men like this whole rash of like predators and the patriarchy and constantly imposing themselves on women and women's spaces? Because if that's true, if you believe that to the degree that the left claims to believe it, why would you ever create a mechanism where somebody can just arbitrarily claim, yeah, I'm a girl, and now they can go right into those spaces and compete on those teams and take away those scholarships and do everything else? Why would you do that?
And when they say that this isn't happening, I remember in our state, in Virginia, this happened twice in the same county.
With the same year, students.
With the same students.
Yeah.
And then what's incredible about this is that when the parents showed up to the school board meeting and were upset about the fact that their daughters were being molested and assaulted by this perpetrator within the public school system, they were arrested for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And called a bigot.
And called a bigot. And not only were they arrested, not only were they called a bigot, they were told that they were lying about it. And then we found out that the school system and the school board were trying to cover it up.
Yeah,
and they didn't want to actually let the news out to the public.
So here was the crazy part about that, because this is where we get into these, I don't want to say gray areas, but let's just say misrepresentations of what's actually taking place. So you have this thing in Loudoun County, Virginia, by the way, like wealthiest county in America. So you have this episode where a boy, so this boy and this girl had done stuff before, right? But he puts on a dress. They're in the girl's bathroom. He wants to do something. She says no. He forces himself on her, does it anyway. So the school reports it, right? The school reports it to the authorities. The student gets transferred to another school where he proceeds to sexually assault another female student at a different point. You want to know what actually came out in the, I don't know if it was the deposition or whatnot, but what it came out when the attorney general actually really pushed hard on this to figure out what exactly happened. It turns out one of the teachers had actually entered into the girl's bathroom when this assault was taking place. And when she was asked, why didn't you do something about it? Her response was, it is not uncommon for this sort of thing to happen in the bathroom. So here's what I'm going to put out there. Again, to Christian's point about, this would never happen. Yeah. No, nobody wants it. And this isn't going on anywhere. Not only did it happen in Loudoun, but then when the story started to get out and the father was understandably upset about this and goes before the school board, there's this question because this was brought up. Like this is a potentially dangerous situation. And they asked, I think it was the superintendent, the school board asked the superintendent, has there been any case, and I can't remember if they used the word convicted or whatnot. And what it is that because it was under investigation, the superintendent could legally say, I don't know of any case where we can confirm that this has taken place. Notice.
Because it's alleged until it's confirmed.
Right? Because it's alleged until it's confirmed, right? It's alleged until it was confirmed. And those are the sort of games that are played in order to get away with hiding over the stuff that is actually taking place. We have another story here in Virginia. Her name was Sage. I carried the legislation, Sage's Law. By the way, died on a straight party line vote in Virginia this last year, in part because they stacked the committee in such a way to where they had to hear testimony on 3 bills instead of 1, even though the 3 bills didn't have much to do with each other. There were 3 separate bills, but they stacked the testimony, and the mother that came in to talk about, yes, I think it was Fairfax County Schools. Yes, my daughter was dealing with depression. She was dealing with other issues. And, she gender confused. That became a thing where, the school basically changed all of her pronouns, offered her, resources and support. Next thing you know, she runs away. She goes missing. Now she's being trafficked. They finally find her. I think it was up in Baltimore. They finally find her, or in Maryland. They recover her. And when she goes up to retrieve her daughter, the attorney up there doesn't allow the daughter to see her because they're convinced that what really happened here is that the parents were mean to her and weren't affirming her gender. And so instead of giving her back to those mean parents, they put her in foster care, where she promptly went missing and was trafficked again, this time all the way into Texas. It was a Texas judge that finally gave her back to her parents, right? Give her back to her parent. And she's recovering now, but it's a long road, right? That's the sort of thing that goes on in these sorts of environments where all of a sudden what is the assumption within the public school system, and some of these public school systems, and certainly with certain teachers and certain administrators, and I guarantee you with certain politicians, because I'm in the same legislature they are, it's this idea that the school is the one that we will be trusting to raise your children. The school is the one that we will give the benefit of the doubt to when it comes to questions of sexual identity. It's not you, the parent, even though Virginia law says that the parents have the fundamental right for the care, upbringing, and education of their children. No. We're going to ignore that because we, the school system, know better. And so they will say things like, well, you can't require the school system to talk to the parent before, No, all this bill does is it says, doesn't require you to out their child to them or whatever it is. All the bill does is it says, if the school system is going to reinforce this new gender identity, right? If you're going to reinforce the gender dysphoria my child is experiencing, you don't get to do that without talking to us as the parents first. You don't get to change their name. You don't get to change their pronouns. You don't get to require everybody else to refer to them by a different name or different pronouns. You don't get to do that until you talk to the parents. Not one of them voted for it. So here's what I'm going to tell you. That's the reality. That is the reality. You might not like it. You might think it's not going on in your school. Maybe it isn't going on in your school. But I am telling you right now, there's nothing legally preventing them from doing it. And if you don't think the trend is moving in that direction, you are not paying attention. You just aren't. And I'm tired of being told it's not happening because, again, right, I sit on the education committee in a state legislature. We get reports. We get insights. We get insights you probably don't get as a parent. So, I said, far less likely in a homeschooling environment for that sort of thing to be taking place. And then far less likely that they're going to hide it from you and not tell you.
So before even the gender thing, kids have been exposed to a lot of things I'm pretty sure mom and dad would rather them not be exposed to. And it's not even necessarily the teachers and those folks, A
lot of times it's other students. I mean, again, this is the part where I'm not trashing teachers that find themselves in a difficult environment that are trying to do the best they possibly can under difficult circumstances. But what I'm saying is that when this sort of thing is happening in this environment, it gets really frustrating for homeschool parents when we get asked about, what about socialization? Where it's
I can't even believe how many parents have talked to me. What makes you think you're qualified to? Yeah. And I've been asked that so many times, and you're supposed to they expect that it's just an honest question.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't get offended at that question. But if you were to pose the same type of questions back, and point certain things out back, they sure don't like that.
Oh, no.
And you're
Well, and again, here's what I want to know. Who taught them that you have to have a master's degree in order to teach your kid how to read? Did just nobody learn how to read until we had a bunch of people with master's degree from Penn State teaching? Like, we're all just illiterate before that happened? Like, again, part of the operation of systems is to perpetuate the necessity of the system. Now, it could be that the system has very real benefits, right? Very real, tangible benefits that are necessary and required. The thing that I get skeptical of is when you start to see more and more educational institutions require you to move up within their institution before you get a pay raise. Like, we've seen this firsthand where somebody will be doing the job well, but they will get paid less. Why? Because they haven't completed their master's degree yet. Without their master's degree, you don't get the pay raise. Why? Are they doing a good job? Have they been effective? Do the students like them? Are we seeing benefits? Yeah. So why is the master's degree? Why is it that higher ed is in a position now where they have to economically benefit before you can economically benefit?
Exactly.
Not because what they're providing is just so dang good that you absolutely need it, but because legally the government won't let you make more money until you go to this other institution that the government seems to give preferential treatment to. I guess for all the people who like to say, follow the money, should you follow the money there? Would it be a good idea to follow the money there? But again, this is where this goes into this whole idea of, socialization is a double-edged sword. Good socialization is incredibly beneficial, and bad socialization can leave scars that your child will never recover from.
I wouldn't say that it's a double-edged sword so much that I would say that it's a term that lacks any meaning outside of a broader context.
True.
It reminds me of so many other phrases that we've talked about on this show that society inherently pushes the idea that they're inherently good, but they're not. Things like tolerance, diversity, and equity are actually a good example of this. Things that on paper, it's like, oh, well, who's against tolerance? Well, tolerance of what?
We've all been
who's against socialization? Socializing with whom?
Yeah, we've all been taught to have this Pavlovian response to certain words, and if you don't have the right response, you're shunned or you're considered a bad person. And look, let's just acknowledge that there are cultures develop certain words and connotations around those words for where there's a general understanding. The problem is when that general understanding gets hijacked to mean something that it never meant before. And that's what we're seeing right now. All right. Part 3, what's the third top reason why you shouldn't homeschool your kids? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, they probably won't be exposed to ideas like puberty blockers and top surgeries, at least not from like authority figures. Could they see it on a show? Could they see it on social media? Yes, but it's not the sort of thing that they're going to get from, I don't know, their third grade teacher, right? They're not going to walk in and see a bunch of flags on the wall and be like, what is that? Right? They're not going to get a bunch of people saying, hey, this is, what pronoun does that mean? Or what does that actually mean? They're not going to get that as much, most likely. Now, again, if you homeschool, you could choose to do that. And that would be one thing that you could do as a parent. You could choose to expose your kids to those ideas at incredibly young ages, and there's nobody that can really stop you from doing so. But at least you won't be compelled by law to hand over your tax dollars to an institution which has decided that they will decide when your children should be exposed to these ideas. And if you don't like it, well, tough, because as one member of the teachers union says, it's not their children, it's our children.
Jeez.
Right? Yeah, that's the sort of crap that we see. All right, part 4, reason number 4. Oh gosh, this is an important one, and this goes right to the heart of socialization as well. Your kids are probably going to be forced to spend time with people of all ages instead of just their ages, right? Like I pointed this out once that I think it's interesting that a number of times you will have people come up to, like we've had this before, where they'll say, "Wow, your children just seem very comfortable with conversing with adults, and they look you in the eye when you talk to them, and they're able to talk about." Well, yeah, because every environment that we take them into, not just within our homeschooling environment, but when they go to the theater, or when they go to a civic event, or they go to a political event, or they go to a sporting event or whatnot, they're constantly interacting with people older than them, younger than them, their same age, and it's normal to them. It's this concept that they're all going to be shoved into a room with only kids their own age, and that's who their peers are. Their peers are people that they're their own age. Right? That is a foreign concept to most homeschool students. They're used to interacting older than them, younger than them, maybe sometimes same age as them, depending on the various events that they do. Because there are some things that you would classify as more age appropriate, right? It's not totally absurd to have kids hanging out with other kids their same age. I would argue that it becomes more absurd, though, when it's this idea that both their social experience and their academic experience should be dictated by what you think the mean average is for the particular age group. Because what we end up finding in a public school setting is you get some very, very frustrated teachers that have some students that could excel within certain topics or subject matters if they were provided the opportunity to be able to do so, but they can't because they have to wait for these kids to catch up. You have other students that desperately need more additional help, but they can't get as much of it they would like because you have other students that also need attention on particular areas. Then you have a whole variety of backgrounds. I would say right now, as much as you might think you know your teacher, as much as you might think you know the other kids in that classroom, you have very little idea about what is actually going on at home for all of those students and the various ideas, perspectives, and socializations that are taking place that are then being brought in and put into proximity with your kid. And one of the things that I think is the most telling a lot of times whenever somebody says, oh, we can't have greater school choice, or we can't have, because then some kids will leave the public school and that's not going to be good for the other kids that are left behind. It's like, wait a second, I'm sorry. You're now saying that my kid's job in the public school system is to create a better environment for the other kids that have a worse environment? Like, is my kid now just a cog in the machine to make your overall numbers better? Is that their purpose? So the school system is not there for the student. The student is there to prop up the school system. Is that what you're telling me? Because that kind of seems like it's a little bit backwards. Now, should a student also be someone that contributes to the environment that they're in? Absolutely. But the idea that you would hold a student back or keep a student in a place where they cannot flourish because you think it might have some positive benefit on another student that is struggling or suffering from something that goes way outside of the education system is absurd. And we know it tends to work in the reverse. It's not that the good students and good environments are able to help with and bring up the students that are struggling with, again, home stuff or abuse or whatnot. What ends up happening is that the highly disruptive students bring down the learning experience for everyone else, bring down the social experience for everyone else. Now, does that mean that student, that disruptive student, maybe that student that is dealing with a horrible home life, shouldn't also get an education and shouldn't also get the attention that they need? No, of course not. I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy for that child that finds themselves in a horrible situation. But the way that responsible adults would handle that is they would say, we have to get this child into an environment that's going to work for them, not shove them into an environment in which now it doesn't work for anybody. Mm-hmm. And yet, that's what we do. And increasingly, what you're seeing within your school system is that they are actually trying to take away the disciplinary measures that are still available to teachers and principals. Because after all, we don't want to create an environment where this child can't get access to a good education. It's like, no, that particular child is dealing with things that need to be addressed. And if you put them into an environment, it's going to adversely affect everyone. How is that fair to every other student? But again, if you operate in this oppressor mindset, well, then that student is the oppressed, right? And therefore they get preferential treatment, even if it's to the detriment of everyone else. And if you don't like that, you're mean, because there can't be another possible solution where we still get that child the things that they need. No. We have to do it within this public system model. So again, your kids in a homeschool environment, because a lot of people have this fixture of homeschooling as if it's just isolation in the home all the time. That's not it. One of the greatest things that you'll experience about being a homeschooler is the ability to be able to get out there and do things and provide experiences and teach your kid this. Please listen to me on this. One of the most important lessons that our children learned about education is that education is not a building you go to. It is not a textbook that you open up. Education is a constant process of learning and expanding your knowledge, your capabilities, and your wisdom. And when you see it through that lens, as opposed to a structure or a system, all of a sudden education becomes something that you love and then you enjoy. And that's huge. That's a game changer in somebody's life. Because what will end up happening is that over time, they become motivated to learn. because learning is not something they had to sit there in a chair and do on a particular time schedule with people that maybe they liked, maybe they didn't like, maybe were good for their education and socialization, maybe bad. They didn't have to do any of that.
I will say that it does seem like there are a lot of people that usually it's the people that are saying socialization and, using the buzzwords that they've been taught by the public education system. It behooves them to use those buzzwords. But it is interesting because there are a lot of different ways to homeschool. There are some people that do something called unschooling, where they're taking away all of these parameters and teaching their kids in a much more organic way. To give an example of that, I had somebody laugh recently about a class that we had entered into Luke's transcripts, culinary.
Yeah.
And the reason why they laughed is because we didn't do a structured, okay, now we're going to do culinary class every week. What we did do is we're going to have the great anniversary bake off, and you guys are going to go ahead and each of you are going to design, choose the ingredients, and put together and bake a cake, basically a wedding cake, because it was Nick and I's 20th anniversary.
It was during COVID too. So it was like, yeah.
And so we got them all of the supplies they needed and let them free to do this themselves. They just had to know their process and make sure everything went right. And we judged it. We took photos with it. We did everything. They got aprons and the whole deal. And we made it a really fun challenge where they actually won a prize for what they were doing. Along with that, there are a lot of different meals that we've had the kids learn how to make, different breads we've had them learn how to make, the process for it, how to measure, all the things that go into it, how to make a sauce, how to make a roux, so they've learned all of these things. But because it didn't happen in okay, now it's time, this 45-minute block is culinary.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this and do these little paperwork and busy work. No, this is a type of education that happened very organically, but every single one of our kids can cook because of it, and they know how to make their sauces. They know how to make pasta. Luke had to learn how to make.
I made him make handmade pasta, like
handmade pasta.
We had a ton of extra eggs, and we're like, gosh, we're like we have so many eggs right now, we can't eat them fast enough, and we're looking like, okay, what's the best way to quote unquote preserve eggs? I was like, oh, we'll make noodles. And so Luke had an assignment where he loves pasta and he likes to make noodles. He likes to make, he makes fairly complex like ramen dishes and things like that. But we said, okay, your job
where he makes the ramen noodles.
Yeah, and I told him, I said, your job is you got to make 2 pounds of dry noodles. So it's like once you've done through the entire process, you could have 2 pans worth. So what did he have to do? We had to research it. He had to look it up. He had to figure out ways to do it. He had to make sure that he had his measurements right. He had to plan out ahead on like, how much do I got to make in order to get to this particular amount?
Good thing he finished it, because this was the classic "the dog ate my homework" situation. Because
it was my fault.
Nick had moved things from an upper rack to a lower rack that Luke had drying. Yeah. And Nick needed the space on the upper rack, so he moved it to the lower rack. And a dog
ate all of his noodles.
Ate all of the noodles.
Yeah. Well, and the fun thing about that too is our kids don't just know how to cook; they actually know how to cook complex things. And it wasn't because we were sitting over their shoulder the entire time teaching them how to do it. There was elements that we would help with, you would help with. But they were also able to pursue what they wanted to cook based off of their individual tastes and likes. And, again, I bring back the ramen example for Luke. Lily makes some of the best. I'm sorry, babe. Lily's the best sourdough maker in the house.
She makes a good sourdough.
Right now. Oh my gosh, she's really good. And then Allie's a very good baker. She actually won the cake off. She won the cake off competition. So our youngest actually won the cake off competition that year. And we had been watching a lot of baking shows because it was COVID and we were all, stuck in the house and on the property. And so we thought it was fun at night. We get done, we watch these, cake baking shows.
It was also an incredibly artistic exercise that they went through. Luke did a wedding cake Death Star
He did a Star
with
Wars
Han
theme.
Solo and
Princess
Leia on it, with little ships and everything that he had made out of molding chocolate and fondant and different molds. He had a bunch of different ways that he did it. It was pretty outrageous, actually.
Lily made like bacon flowers things on hers.
Lily's had bacon as a main theme.
Yeah, and then Allie just had a very, very good. I mean, it was just the
hers was like a classic wedding cake, but then there were like really cute.
Oh yeah,
all
a lot
the
of
flowers.
flourishes.
Anyway,
all right. So, and speaking of that, and that leads me to my fifth. The fifth reason not to homeschool is you get a ton more time with your kids. I mean, oh my gosh. So, I mean, everyone else I know, like they were, you know, I think I can't remember how many like hundreds of hours or whatnot it equals up to over the school year or over the education that, you know, your kids are gone. And some people really enjoy that time. So yeah, look, if you don't like being around your kids, homeschooling is not for you because you're going to be around them all the time. But here's what I'll say. One of the biggest things that I hear, parents oftentimes talk, and obviously homeschool is not the only way to, you know, prevent what I'm about to discuss. But a lot of times parents will talk about there being like these massive generational gap or just not like what I don't understand the terminology my kids use. And I don't understand the slang they use. And I don't understand this. And, you know, and their music and their TV shows and their this and their that. We don't really have that with our kids in part because and it wasn't because we didn't watch a lot of stuff. We did. We watched a lot of programs together, but.
Well, we did spend about the first 10 or 15 years of their life with no cable and no satellite. So whatever they were watching, they were things that we were okay with them watching. Like I went and got the entire box set of I Love Lucy. Nick got the whole box set of Gilligan's Island. And, you know, hey, they were ridiculous, but the kids loved them. There were a lot of different shows that we let them watch and things like that. But they weren't getting the commercials in between. Yeah. They weren't getting whatever weird Nickelodeon crap was going on where like dad's a total doofus moron and, you know, mom is the smart one and the kids hate both parents anyway. We just didn't do that.
The shows where mom's an obnoxious girl boss and dad's a moron. Yeah. Right? Like, and the kids hate both of them. And really the kids are the smartest of everyone. Like they're constantly teaching.
And it wasn't necessarily that we were trying to shelter our kids or any of that. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. I don't think there's anything wrong with you make your choice whatever you want to do in that area. We just didn't want to have to pay for cable and we thought satellite was terrible. So we didn't get satellite. So it kind of happened almost, it was semi-intentional, circumstances that caused us not to have all of that. And I look back and I'm so glad we didn't.
Yeah. Well, and look, it's like we know some people that are far more strict than we ever were on this. Like we you know, there was programs I look back now where it's like, maybe that wasn't the best thing for, you know, kids, like sitcoms or stuff like that we thought were kind of funny and reasonably okay. But all that to say that what it is that there was a lot more time that we had together, and our kids spend a ton of time with their friends. And our house is kind of one of the houses that everyone goes to and whatnot. But what ended up happening was we knew who their friends were, right? Yeah. Like we know who their friends are. They come over, they hang out. And because we had that time and because we would, this is a little point that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think it is. What also ended up happening is obviously your kids develop kind of a language and experiences with their friends and whatnot. That is stuff that you don't necessarily, they might have a word they use. Like I remember the first time I heard like, you know, bet, like, what are you talking about? Like, or no cap or whatnot. But I would sit down and be like, what does this mean? Right. And they would explain it. And now I use those terms every once in a while just to embarrass them. But there were also terms and understandings and experiences that we had with our kids that they didn't have with their friends. So for instance, we watched BBC adaptations of like Jane Austen and stuff like that. And so I'll never forget like when one of my daughters would look at me and like we'd be talking like, well, what is, you know, what it's so like, wow, she's kind of like a Lydia. So she'd be referring to like Lydia from Pride and Prejudice. Like, oh, this person was acting this way. Or like, oh yeah, he's a Wickham. total Wickham. And so now we have this common vernacular between us, this common language based off of things we watched together as the kids were growing up. And what it does, the reason why friends do that, right? The reason why you have special handshakes or something, the reason why friends do that is because it creates this bonding component over a shared experience that's meaningful but unique to you. Mm-hmm. And when you develop those with your kids through experiences or through exposure like culture or ideas or concepts, you do the same thing with your kid. Now, if you don't get sufficient time with your kids to do that, like if the only time that you have to build that with your children is on the family vacation, or maybe the 30 minutes you get talking together at the dinner table, it's far more difficult for you to develop those kinds of experiences, those kinds of cultural moments in time that are connected to something. They're connected to a memory, and that memory builds bonds.
There's a reason why a lot of times food brings a sense of comfort for a lot of people. And some of that is that it represents your family time a lot of times. I was thinking the other day, I think I mentioned it to you, how a lot of times we'll do dinner and everybody just grabs the dinner and just does whatever they're going to do. And we only once in a while do we actually sit down as a family to do dinner. And I was starting to feel just a little guilty about that. Like, man, everyone talks about how important it is to sit down at the dinner table together and have that time together. And then the thought crossed my mind, I'm with these people 24/7. I am with them all the time. So the people who typically say that mealtime is so important and everything, it's because that's all they're getting. Mm-hmm. They're not getting all that other time. And so I didn't, at that point, I had rationalized for myself that it's not that big of a deal, that we did not sit down and have dinner together as a family more than a couple of times a week, because we get tons of time anyway. Yeah. And dinner time doesn't necessarily equate to the only family time we get. So I kind of figured, I think we're okay.
Yeah. All right. Number six, the sixth reason why you don't want to homeschool your children: the amount of time it takes to actually get through the schoolwork plummets, like absolutely plummets. And if you're the sort of person that doesn't like to get things done in a shorter period of time, if you're the sort of person that likes to needlessly drag something out far more hours than is actually necessary to do the actual work, you're going to hate it. You're going to absolutely hate homeschooling, because one of the biggest shocks you will have as a parent as you homeschool is you'll wake up in the morning and maybe you're dragging a little bit that day and you don't get started till like 9:30 or 10, right? Maybe you guys are just up and you're chipper and it's 7:30 in the morning and you're ready to go. And then all of a sudden you're done by noon and you're like, am I doing something wrong? And the answer is no. The difference is that you're educating, a few people, and there's a lot more freedom to kind of do it in ways that, make sense for the time that you have. Whereas that poor public school teacher, it is forced to, there was this funny joke that a comedian did where it's like, all right, teacher, I want your job is to make sure that these kids know math. Oh, okay. Do they want to know math? No. Oh, okay. Well, are they all in this classroom together because they're at the same aptitude? Nope. Then why are they here? They live close to the building. Like if you look at like all the arbitrary things that poor teacher has to go through, where she's got one student over here that just knows math and is doing a great job and goes home and maybe their parents help them with their homework. She's got another student over here in a broken family with horrible things that, no additional assistance whatsoever. And she's got everything in between, right? Mm-hmm. Everything in between. And her job is to make sure that they're all up to a certain basic math level when they take the standardized test at some point during the year, right? That takes a lot more time to get through all of the topics that essentially the government has decided you need to know. And the government increasingly adds a bunch of other crap on there that you don't need, right? Like we need more time. We need more time for gender ideology. Like we need more time to discuss, sex with your third grader. Like, no, the third graders needs to read at a proficient level. Can we focus? How about we focus how about we focus on the things that really matter at this particular age and stage of development, right? And then maybe not do some of this other stuff that probably doesn't really matter, right? Well, when it's the government deciding that thing, tough. And those teachers all know, even if the teacher knows this is ridiculous, this is stupid, this is not helping, doesn't matter because they don't make the policy. That's another thing that blows my mind is people are like, oh, you hate teachers. No, I have a huge amount of sympathy for teachers trying to operate in this environment because so much of this doesn't make sense. But in a homeschool model, what you end up learning is, again, one, education is not just the textbooks. Education is not just the tests. We still had tests. We still had textbooks because they were meaningful and they made sense for certain things. But in other areas, I'm not giving you a letter grade for the cake you made, right? I'm just going to tell you if it's good or not, right? And you're going to know if it's good or not, right? Yeah. I'm not giving you a letter grade for the chicken tractor you had to build because we're going to be raising meat chickens this year. If the chickens don't get out and it's easy to move, good job. And if it doesn't, guess what you're going to be doing? Chasing chickens around. So there was just, again, so much of what you might call more of the structured side of the education, right? Like a lot, maybe some of the math work or maybe some of the other stuff like the English or the literacy component we had. You just get through it a lot quicker when you don't have 20 to 27 students in a room with a whole bunch of issues that have nothing to do with what you're teaching them.
And you're not dealing with all the transitions, the waiting for everybody, the standing in line, taking this break because you have to, various electives just to fill up the time. There's a lot of things in school that are literally just time fillers. Yeah. Because the parents need to work. The kids can't be going home at noon.
And if you don't think that's true, ask your kids what they do for the last 2 weeks of the school year, pretty much every year. And what you're going to find out is they watch a lot of movies.
Hey, and that's always been a thing. When we were young, I remember the last 2 weeks of school, we watched tons of movies. We just had to be there to fill up the time.
Movies, yeah.
Yeah, because of the day requirements. Yeah. And here's Nick, in art class, convincing Mrs. Pete that we needed to watch Monty Python.
Why do you got to bring that up?
Holy Grail, yeah.
If my high school teacher, Mr. Jones, is watching this, I'm sorry for sleeping in every single one of your classes my senior year. I'm actually Facebook friends with him. He's he was a very popular teacher with my graduating class, and I actually took a class on the Civil War. It was an elective that was offered for the first year of my senior year. And I was like, well, I already know everything about the Civil War. I'm just going to sleep through the entire thing. And it would be like, I'd wake up and I'd be like, what part of the war are we at? And he'd be like, Christian, we're at Vicksburg. And I'm like, okay, I already know this part. I'm going to go back to sleep again.
Yeah. Well, I got in trouble. I remember senior year, I worked in the office because I had an elective space. There wasn't a class for that space that was going to be useful to me. I didn't really need it. I had my requirements, and so I worked in the office. I know other students who were excellent at, certain things like culinary, for example, and ends up she's helping the teacher in culinary, right? Yeah. Because she had excelled so much that her senior year, she's just helping at that point. And so
she's just unpaid labor.
Unpaid labor.
Which I was told was bad.
But yeah, it is kind of interesting how much time is wasted. Even in elementary school, you've got recess to go and get all the jitters out, get all the go run and play, which I think kids really need. I will say that school does take longer in the junior high school range. In elementary school, yeah, you can get it done in like 2 to 3 hours. Everything you need to do, 2 to 3 hours. And that doesn't include any homework. Everything's homework at that point. Yeah. But the nice thing is you don't have any snow days, nothing like that. You just kind of get the stuff done as you need to. Junior high gets a little harder. And then as you get into the higher maths and, certain things that are, sciences and things like that get a little bit harder and a little bit more time consuming as they get older, which is, fine. But one of the things with homeschool that I do like is once they understand the concept, you do not need to make them continue to do that busy work anymore. Yeah. Once they know it, once you know they've got it mastered, move on.
Yeah. So no, that's a great point. And that leads me on to point 7, because this kind of transitions in. And point 7 on why you shouldn't homeschool is that, guess what? You're probably going to have to buy more than one textbook. All right. To the extent that you need that textbook, you're probably going to have to buy more than one. And here's why. Because whereas The public school oftentimes has their set course of government approved curriculum, and this is your math book, or this is your English book, or this is this. What you're going to end up finding with your own kids is that they have different interests, they have different abilities, they have different challenges, and they have different life goals. And so there's a couple things that we learned through this process. One was like for math. Once we got into the higher math, we're like, okay, this is beyond Tina's and mine capability to do this. So where do we go? All right, great. There's a homeschool co-op. They got some good math teachers. We're going to go there. And then what we ended up learning is that math curriculum that was being used wasn't working for one of our kids. It just wasn't working. Teacher was good. Just the math curriculum wasn't working. The book didn't make sense to her. And in most settings, the result for that would be you'd either have to go out and hire a separate tutor, or they might just be stuck, or they might just start to think that they're an idiot or whatever it is. Whereas we just said, oh, this curriculum isn't working. Okay, we'll get a different one.
Yeah.
And the curriculum that we ended up using that we really liked for our kids was Matthew C. And there was a big focus on visual depiction of numbers.
And it was heavily teaches you the basic knowledge of the decimal system and how everything works, and then it builds on that structure. But we found that one actually before the higher math situation happened. That same student of ours, we realized that she did not retain her times tables very well.
Yeah.
In the previous year, we had done, I think it was sunlight, or there was a type of learning that's called spiral learning, that really it made it so she never quite mastered anything, because they kept reintroducing new things before she had fully mastered the one thing. And I realized that for her type of learning, she needs mastery. Mastery was really important. And we realized that toward the end of one school year, and I was like, she's got to do division next year. And I don't feel like she has a good handle on her multiplication. So I switched her over to Matthew C, which I had already switched the other two students over to. And so I just seamlessly started her in there and got her spun up. And it was crazy because she learned her times tables really fast, just in a matter of a few weeks. And we were still able to complete the division on time in that year.
Yeah.
Because we were able to switch it on the fly, and we were able to move on when she had mastered it. Well, that same student had the very big problem in high school with the type of book that was being used was really meant to be taught every single day. And it was only being taught once a week. So they were covering four topics a day in an hour and 45-minute class. And it was like drinking from a fire hose. It was just
and for
too
some
much.
students, it was fun. This is the important part to remember. For some students, it was fun.
No, actually, her whole class was failing. And it was because of the whole class was failing, the entire class. And
I guess
so it was the book. The
conceptual
book didn't work.
The conceptual point I'm trying to make, though, is that like I'm not questioning that. The conceptual point I'm trying to make is that you can throw some kids into an environment with very little instruction, and because they love math or because they're really, really naturally good at it, they can be fine with that. You can throw other kids into it, and they will struggle with it.
Okay, my point that I was going to make is that some books are meant for a certain type of learning environment, and other ones are meant for a flexible learning environment. This was a book that was really meant for public schools. It was I think it was like, it might've been Saxon Math or something. Anyway.
I had those textbooks.
Yeah. And it was meant to have basically a lesson and then reinforcement of that lesson every day. And then I think it was like 4 lessons a day. And then Friday would have been like your little quiz.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that you're trying to do building blocks on something you learned before, literally 10 minutes ago in the class. You just learned this, and now you're trying to build on it 10 minutes later, and you haven't fully done what it takes to cement the idea because you haven't done the work for it yet. And so anyway, I don't mean to get off on that topic. It's just that you can find, even in homeschool, there will be curriculums that do not work for you. It doesn't mean that you're failing at homeschooling. It means that you need to find the right curriculum for the way your child learns.
Well, and I think a lot of times people beat themselves. This is where what are your credentials to figure this out? Because again, you don't have a master's degree. That's why you picked the wrong curriculum. It's like, No, it's what it is that the public school system picks the wrong curriculum for certain students, right? But again, they're operating off of a mass production model. So they can't individually select curriculum based off of the needs of your student because they've got 25 in the classroom to worry about.
In our situation, if it's not working, you can change it on the fly.
Move out. And here's the other thing too that I'm going to throw into this category, and that is the idea that there's this because people have the experience of going to public school, and I went to public school and then I went to a very, very small Christian school, but it's this idea that, well, you've got to do these kind of things in this sort of situation on this sort of timeline, or else you're behind. Like, okay, behind what? Behind the mean average? Okay, why does the mean average matter? Now, if you're talking about like reading, for instance, there's a lot of students that were late talkers, late readers that later on in life are some of the most brilliant people out there. So were they stupid then and they just got smart later? Or do people kind of develop differently? We also see this with a lot of times in generalized categories, boys and girls usually develop differently with respect to, academics and how they engage. They're coming out more and more now saying boys need more time engaging in like activities and play and stuff like that. And if you're forcing them to sit still in a room and to engage in rote memorization or whatever else it is, yeah, they're going to appear to be completely rambunctious because you're driving them nuts. So a lot of this too is it's built around this idea of experts have told us that if you're learning this way, you're doing well. And if you're not learning this way, you're not doing well. And you need intervention or you need help or you need special programs. In some cases, that may be true. In other cases, it might be that you're just forcing a student into a learning environment that does not work for them. And now you've diagnosed them as something being wrong with them, when in reality, it might be that what's wrong for them is the method of schooling you've given them. And so this is another point I want to bring out. Again, when one of our kids was struggling with a particular subject, and they were in high school at this point, and it was it was ruining their whole learning experience because they were just having such a hard time. Again, and this was advanced math. And then we sat down and we said, sweetheart, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? You're a freshman, you're about to go into your sophomore year. What do you think you want to do with your life? Give us some ideas. And it wasn't just like pick your career now and that's what we're going to, it was, okay, I like this, I like this, I like this. Okay, out of these interests, let's look at which of these is economically viable, which of these is, probably a little bit more risky. That doesn't mean give it up. It just means that, we got to adequately prepare to put you in the best position to be able to, pursue what your dream is, but also feed yourself. And as we started looking at that, we're like, what none of what you want to do requires? Algebra 2. None of what you want to do with your life, none of the options that you've picked requires you to master Algebra 2. So why are we going to waste all this time forcing you to master a subject you don't need, you don't particularly like, and is taking up so much of your day that you can't focus on all the subjects that would be relevant for what you want to do? Mm-hmm. And so we said, okay, we're just not going to do Algebra 2 anymore.
No.
And that wasn't an admission of failure. That wasn't, oh gosh, we need some sort of intervention because she has to learn Algebra 2. It was, no, we just bought back not only hours of time, we also recovered from a situation where it's, I'm stupid and I hate this, into focusing on subjects where, oh my gosh, I am smart, I am capable, I can do things, and I enjoy this.
We also switched to a curriculum that still covered mathematical ideas, but had to do with all the math you'll encounter in life.
Yeah.
And so it had to do with budgeting and saving and, investing and all of those types of things that I think most kids don't actually understand until it's maybe an interest later on in life. They start looking into it. Like, Christian, did you learn, how you love to invest and you love to follow stocks and things of that nature. Did you do that in school? Did you learn that in school?
No, I wasn't taught how to do even my taxes in school,
no.
Let alone how to make money in school.
How do I pay my taxes? This is a parallelogram.
Have you seen the
That's
memes
going to help me a
on
lot
this?
in parallelogram season.
It's like magma is molten rock. Like, and there's so many memes of this, of like the useful stuff that they don't teach versus the useless stuff that they do teach.
Yes.
And They don't even do a good job of teaching the useless stuff either. But like, why would you? It gets back to division of labor. There's certain interests that I have, and there's certain skill sets that I have, and there's sometimes those things align, sometimes they don't, right?
Yeah.
There's interests that I have that aren't practical, but there's certain things that I'm good at.
Yeah.
I think I'm good at doing district analysis, for example. Obviously, I wasn't taught that in public school. I had to teach myself that over many years, but like that's kind of my point. The careers that we go into are not necessarily the type of careers that we're being trained for within the public school system. I don't have just one job, but between all the different jobs that I have, first off, some of them didn't exist when I was in public school.
Yeah.
I mean, podcasting on the internet was not that this is the only thing I do for a living, right? But
Back in my day.
like a lot, I had no idea when I was in school that I would be sitting here at a table having a conversation with you 2 times a week. I also had no idea that I would be doing district analysis for hundreds of legislative districts across the country on a yearly basis and getting paid for that, or that I would be working in electoral politics, or that I would work in political marketing. And the skills that I developed in order to do those jobs are not the skills that I was taught within the public school system. Instead, I was taught a bunch of useless stuff that I never needed to apply trigonometry. Now I needed to apply some mathematics in order to, especially on the electoral side, I needed to apply some mathematics.
Statistics.
It was mostly statistics that I was, that I actually needed to learn in order to do the job that I'm currently doing. I didn't need to learn calculus, and I didn't need to learn geometry or trigonometry. I was actually good at geometry and trigonometry. I was terrible at calculus. And I also didn't need to learn physics. Although there's certain elements of that I find fascinating within the hard sciences, but that gets into like, it gets back to division of labor and skill sets. Certain people, believe it or not, are not blank slates. I know that that's very taboo to say that on the left, because they apply the blank slate theory to everything, because humans are just supposed to be cogs in a machine. But people have skills and interests that they're going to want to go into because people are unique. And instead, we treat them like a commodity, as a one-size-fits-all system within the public school system. And it makes sense, right? Because the whole point, you got, going back to what you were talking about with the mass production of education in mind. The point is the education, not the student. That's the way the public school system is oriented. What is best for the state and what is best for the mass production of education, not what is best for this individual child, because you can't build a scalable, centralized, one-size-fits-all system with the individual in mind.
Yeah.
Those two things are at odds with each other. So somebody like me who went into a very specific set of careers and has a very specific set of skill sets and interests, the public school system was not built for somebody like me any more than it was built for probably your son or daughter if you're listening to this podcast.
Well, I think it's interesting too when you listen to quotes from like Rockefeller, or you look at the Prussian model, which really kind of pushed this whole idea of mass government sponsored schooling. In Prussia, it was designed to make very good conscripts, right? They wanted people that knew how to follow orders, obey, and do what needed to be done in wartime. Rockefeller is quoted as saying, like, I don't need thinkers, I need good workers, I need laborers, because he needed people to work in mass production factories. And mass production factories. And look, there's a lot of benefits to specialization and division of labor when it comes to, instead of having one person build the entire car from beginning to end, they work on an assembly line and they focus on a particular task, and that allows you to get greater efficiencies. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that if you're trying to create an environment where that's all you want and you have a mass production model approach to it, well, then you're probably going to end up producing something like that. And again, that's the part where the way we looked at it was, okay, let's look at this logically, right? We don't need to have a master's degree to figure this out. When you're younger, there is certain basic information that you should know about the world. I don't care who you are or what you do, you need to know how to read, right? You need to know how to communicate. Doesn't matter what field you go into, you need to be able to do those things. Okay, great. Those are building blocks. Let's focus on those. You need to be able to do some basic mathematics because it's the universal language, right? And it's critical to everything you do, from paying your taxes to balancing your books at your company to cooking, right? So, okay, great. Let's get that basic level of mathematics that's needed. And then what happens? So you have what I call a very generalized approach to education, where you're exposing your kids to all kinds of different, concepts and ideas, and you're giving them capabilities to be able to build upon those ideas. And what happens over time is you start to see where they excel, where they have more challenges. Right. And your goal is to get them up to that basic level that everybody kind of needs within society to be able to effectively operate. And then you start to specialize more on what do you want to do? Where are your interests? What are you excited about? And then how do we prepare you to be able to go out and execute on that? And it takes a lot of pressure off when you realize, at the end of the day that, okay, my child has absolutely zero interest in, anything having to do with physics, right? They have no desire to go in any sort of career field. Okay, what is the basic level of physics that every human being should have some understanding of, right? You're going to find out that's a pretty small field, right? That doesn't require a great deal of time and effort on you, behalf of the parent. And again, it's liberating, but what it also does is it recognizes that you have a limited amount of time, right, during these childhood years to develop core capabilities to be able to go out and be an effective adult. So focus on those. And here's what you'll find, and here's a concept that is completely foreign to, I think, many within the government-run school system, and that is, if you are spending time on a subject that has zero value for that child past a certain level, the more you require them to take it, you're wasting their time. It is a net negative, because now instead of them being able to do the thing that would be valuable for them, you're forcing them to do this. Why? Well, because if you want a college prep high school diploma, you have to have that. Why? Well, because the college requires it. Oh, you mean the same college that's going to force you to pay for a bunch of general ed classes that you either should have already been able to master in high school or has nothing to do with what you're actually going to the institution
All
for.
it does is keep professors employed.
Yeah. There's a look, I am all for the idea that so when people talk about a classical, like liberal arts education, the idea is that you're not just creating a person that is specialized in a particular field, but you're actually exposing them to a lot of different ideas and concepts, and you're giving them a general understanding of how things are interconnected and work. And there can be value in that, right? But shouldn't people still have the option of saying, no, I only need this to do what I need to do? Why do you require them to do all of the other things? And again, that's the part where it's like, okay, I'm supposed to follow the money everywhere else, but not there? Okay. All right, here we go. Let's go to, we just got a couple more left to go. All right. Number 8 reason why you should not homeschool your kids. My kids got through almost their entire learning experience, only thinking there was 2 genders. I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy. They had no idea. And look, if I'm being perfectly honest, and this is where I've failed in a way that the public school system is apparently succeeding, is that my kids still only believe that there's 2 genders. There's boys and girls. There's men and women. There is not 178 or whatever other genders there might be. We actually dedicated, I feel guilty about this to this day. I just got to confess, we dedicated 0 education hours to even contemplating that there might be 178 different genders with all of the appropriate corresponding pronouns.
Yeah.
And it turns out, like, I mean, so
we didn't
far,
even expose them to furries and all of that.
No, I feel bad because okay, so here's what we did instead of doing that. We focused in on this whole idea that there's such a thing as objective reality, and that words have meanings, and that words by kind of definition have descriptions, right? They're descriptive in nature. And so when I say a table, there's certain attributes that make something a table. And if you don't possess those attributes, it's not a table, right? But if it does possess those attributes, it is, right? And this was this amazing thing that we taught our children. And what it's done is it's caused them to be able to go outside and look at the world and be able to make certain assumptions based off of objective criteria. And so now they don't come to conclusions like, oh, you can identify as anything that you want, and the rest of the world is just supposed to pretend that that's perfectly fine and okay, because that doesn't actually work, right? That can lead to some pretty bad results when dealing with reality, right? I can't touch a hot stove and just identify as someone that isn't affected by heat, right? I can't do that. Why? Well, because objective reality, you can claim whatever you want. You can identify as whatever you want. You can identify as having the gift of flight, right? But gravity is going to determine whether or not that's true, whether you truly deeply believe it or not. And that's what we taught our kids. We taught our kids that what you should do is you should probably take your beliefs, right? And you should work to have those things correspond with reality, unless you want to live in a world that looks like absolute chaos. And so that's what you do. You bring your beliefs in line with reality. You don't demand that reality just adjusts to cater to whatever it is you happen to believe that day because you find it emotionally or intellectually convenient. And here's what's happened. Our children like show up on time for their jobs, right? And then they like work hard. And when they drive down the road, they follow the objective laws and the logic involved with driving in a manner that's safe and not running into people. And they don't just lose their mind, right? When something doesn't correspond or when something doesn't work out the way they anticipated, they immediately go through this logical thought process where they say, oh, I expected this, but that didn't happen. Maybe my expectations were wrong, or maybe what I wanted to happen was incorrect, and maybe I should evaluate the situation and come to a logical conclusion based off of the available data in order to make sure that my thoughts and understanding correspond with reality. That's what we did instead of the, hey, do you feel like a chipmunk today? Like we didn't, and I let him down. I remember one time when Allie, our youngest, thought she was a mermaid. And what I should have done was immediately driven to the ocean, thrown her in and said, be free, right? Because it's my job as a parent to support and affirm
your mermaidness.
And instead what I did was, sweetheart, that's cute, but you're actually a person. You're actually a human being and you can't breathe underwater, right? You can't do that. You can't, and the crab is not going to help you put together a band and sing under the water. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I essentially crushed her dreams and ruined Little Mermaid for her. So
I know. Yeah. So sad.
I know.
So
if
sad.
only I had a master's degree, then I would know. If I had had a master's degree, I would have done all those other things because then I would have been properly affirming whatever my toddler thought was a great idea that day.
Yeah.
Because that's how you build a safe and secure society. All right. Number 9, top 10 reasons. This is 9 on why you shouldn't homeschool. If you homeschool, the odds are is that your kids are not going to have access to taxpayer subsidized pornography in the libraries, which is something that has become very prominent within the public school system now. And I want to do a special call out to a particular senator here in the Commonwealth of Virginia who said, I don't know if it was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but it's got to be pretty close, right? Pretty close. So Senator Bill DeSteff had brought a bill forward that said, we're ending up with a lot of books with pretty graphic depictions of child erotica and pornography in our school libraries, and maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe it's just spitballing here. We shouldn't use taxpayer funds to subsidize the delivery of pornographic materials for minors. Because, if you do that on the outside world, that's a crime. But if you do it within a public school library, apparently it's okay now and it's education. And I watched as a Democrat colleague of ours said, well, this is ridiculous. These kids, the kids can find it anyways right here on the internet and on the phone. It was like, I had no idea that was the reasoning we're using. Okay, so because kids can come into contact with inappropriate material or items or services on the outside world, therefore, we should use tax dollars in order to not only subsidize those items or services, but actually put them directly into the public school system. Is that why you will be adding fentanyl to the Coke machine, you dumbass? Like, I could not believe I was hearing something quite that stupid. Because kids will have access to something bad on the outside, therefore, if the government actively works to take the bad thing and put it in front of your student, that's perfectly okay. That's the logic we're going with. A kid could get hurt in a car accident. So I guess we should drive cars through the hallways, right? Like, this is the sort of, and I want to look at the senator and be like, Are you a product of the educational institutions that you're now advocating on behalf of? Because that would actually make a ton of sense. That would make a ton of sense, because that is some of the worst reasoning I have ever heard. I can come up with 100 examples right now of how we would not do that. Kids might get access to a firearm. Can we put the guns in the schools, Senator? There you go, a little bit something closer to home for you. Kids might get access to hypodermic needles. Should we put those in the classroom? Kids might bully one another outside of the classroom, so we should encourage bullying inside the classroom. Like, how many different examples can we all give right now demonstrating what a stupid method of reasoning that was to be used? And so that's what I'm going to tell you. Does that mean our kids have never, they've never at any point in their life potentially had access to something either through their phone or on, Netflix or something like that? No, they could have been exposed to something like that. But I'll tell you the big difference. The big difference is that I didn't have an outside entity taking my tax dollars in order to give it to another outside entity, which was then going to use it to buy clearly pornographic material and put it into my child's school library, and then want to hide that information from me as their parent.
You're just a book burner. That's all you are at this point.
Clearly.
I just want to bring up one thing though. In all seriousness, we're kind of making light of some of these things, but I do want to highlight that just because our kids were homeschooled doesn't mean they can't be exposed to some of these other things. And so it's not that homeschooling is not going to be your magic fix-all for everything that you don't want your kid exposed to. At some point, there are a lot of other things you have to put in place in order to mitigate or deal with certain types of exposure they could have, or even limit them. It's not just, they're in school, they get exposed. They're out of school, they're never exposed. No.
The job of the parent doesn't stop.
No, and not only that, but like even with learning difficulties and things like that, your child in school goes through some learning difficulties at times. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the school's fault. Sometimes it's the way they learn or what. Well, so like earlier we were talking about being able to adjust curriculums in order to match the learning style. The point we're making isn't that everything is all puppy dogs and lollipops as soon as you start homeschooling your kids or take them out of the public school or what. Your kid can still be exposed to a lot of different things, just like the idiot senator was saying. Yeah. That's not the point. The point is we don't willingly put this stuff in front of them, and we take active measures to reduce the possibility that they are exposed to some of these things. And we're, even if it's like a learning difficulty, we're able to spend more time working on whatever learning difficulty that was. It doesn't mean that they're going to be brilliant as soon as you bring them home and homeschool them. No, you're going to have a lot of difficulties. I don't want to send anybody the wrong message that homeschooling is just this wave the magic wand. Once you're homeschooling, all the other problems go away. That's not true. You're still going to have a lot of hurdles. You're still going to have difficulties, but you're going to be able to deal with them. I had to say that because I don't want to paint the picture like we're
No. As to this particular thing, like I said, this stuff is happening in schools, and you're increasingly, and again, what you're going to hear is nobody wants that in your public school. Yes, they do. If nobody wanted it in your public school,
ordered it.
If nobody wanted it in your public school, it wouldn't be in your public school. Somebody does want it. And now that we've exposed that it's there, because originally they said it wasn't there, then we exposed that it was there, and we exposed how bad it's actually gotten. And their response was, well, if you don't like this, you must be a bigot, or you must be homophobic, or you must be transphobic, or you must be whatever else it might be. So the bottom line is they knew it was there. They wanted it there. They forced you to pay for it. And then when they say things like, well, a kid could access this anyways, there is a huge difference from a kid sneaking around and accessing something that they shouldn't have. At least in that paradigm, the kid understands that what they're accessing is something they shouldn't access. Right. But when the government school puts it in their library,
that makes it okay.
They're probably going to come to the conclusion that not only is it okay for them to do this, but it's appropriate because now it's a part of their education.
And if mom and dad don't like it,
you're not just allowing for it to happen, you're actually encouraging it to take place. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're doing it in a school environment, which you force people to pay for, and you force kids to attend unless their parents can afford an alternative, is morally reprehensible. And that's the real problem here. Okay, last point. and this might be one of the top reasons why you shouldn't homeschool, should never even consider it. Your kids will probably be a lot less impressed by government power and a lot more likely to think that they can figure things out by just working with other people in voluntary cooperation as opposed to compelling other people to do what they want through the law. Now, that's kind of a mouthful there, but let me break it down a little bit. Again, we started off this whole conversation with, why is it that, the kind of the snarky remark about ungrateful communists? Well, again, if you've taught your kids from a very, very early age, right? If your kids have been exposed to this idea that the government provides everything, then you probably shouldn't be, too surprised when they extrapolate that beyond just the education system. And the difference is that when you homeschool, one of the things, especially if you've put in the time and effort to try to do this correctly, is that your kids, I would argue, are exposed to far more circumstances where they have confidence in their ability to do something without whatever credential, which may or may not be appropriate or required, that the government tells them that they have to have. Right? If they grew up and they were able to learn and they're well adjusted, they're not going to be as easily convinced that, that could not possibly have happened unless somebody had a master's degree in education from Penn State, right? Like, you couldn't possibly have learned all the things that you did learn and become a responsible member of society if you weren't educated within this particular model. See, like right off the bat, one of the things that homeschool kids are constantly confronted with is what about socialization? What about this? What about this? What about this? And what they are is they're actually a monument to the fact that many of the things that you've been told are absolutely necessary for your child's development and well-being aren't. And in fact, in some cases may actually be contributing to the opposite. And so they've kind of grown up in an environment where it's like, well, when we needed to learn something, we figured it out. When we needed to, socialize, we didn't just go to this particular time or place with everybody on our own age. We were expected to talk to people older than us. We were expected to be able to talk with people younger than us. We were expected to help out. We were expected to do projects. We were expected to do manual labor. We were expected to work. We were expected to look at things from an entrepreneurial side. We were expected to problem solve. And what they end up finding is that the solutions to most of the problems that they have are not created by some sort of government bureaucracy. They're created by free people working together in voluntary cooperation. They're created by looking at the world logically and engaging in problem solving. Because they're not going to sit there and just say, oh, well, I just got to raise my hand and, you're obviously going to help your kids at various times, but you have a lot more freedom to say, you need to work on figuring this out. You also have a lot more freedom to think outside of the box. The answer is not always step A, step B, step C, and then you arrive here. No. Sometimes you can find a different way to actually get to where you need to go if you're not being forced into this particular model of thinking about everything, right? You still got to use logic, still got to use reason, still got to use reality, because those things don't go away no matter where you're at. But think out of the box, figure out a way to do this. I'm not going to sit here and micromanage you because I'm super worried about the other 25 students in the classroom. We got some time for you to try some things. We got some time for you to fail. We got some time for you to recover. We got some time for you to learn from failing and recovering. Because we're not super worried about, oh my gosh, we got to pass this standardized test. Again, this is where I have a great deal of sympathy for the teachers that are trying to make the best out of a bad situation and are constantly being told by people who are not teachers, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Again, when you're homeschooling, your kids look at this and they learn how to problem solve with other people. And they're not as enamored by this whole idea that, well, there has to be some big central authority. And that central authority decides when you've learned. That central authority decides when you're qualified. That central authority then rewards upon you credentials. And then half the time you get those credentials and you're like, okay, all right, so where's the job? Where's this? It turns out the credential doesn't get you the job. Your abilities do. Can you do the work? Do you have work ethic? Can you effectively communicate? Can you get along with people? Can you work as a team? Can you do all those things? Maybe you learned how to do that in public school. A lot of people do. Maybe you did, but maybe you didn't.
A lot of people don't. I didn't learn any of those things in public school myself. Then again, I still struggle with a lot of those things still. But like, this reminds me of the first point. actually. I think there's a lot of overlap between your 10th point and your first point here about how the public school system has a pattern of producing ungrateful communists. Well, that's the same reason why the public school system also tends to produce people who think that government solutions are the only solutions to any sort of problem. And, we ask ourselves, well, why is this the case? I think it's because the nature of government schooling itself is the reason why it's the case. I asked this question at the start. Why is it that public schools tend to produce ungrateful communists? Well, I think the reason why is the same reason why higher education tends to produce ungrateful communists. It's the same reason why a lot of our institutions right now are kind of producing ungrateful communists. We've talked at length about the processes that are taking place within media, academia, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Hollywood, all of these institutions, and they all seem to be pushing in the same direction. Well, the public school system is one component of that. And we can argue all day long, like, oh, well, it's because of the long march through the institutions. That's definitely happened, certainly within the universities. But there's also something to be said about how it's not just that the institution got hijacked. It's the institution. In this case, it is, you can certainly say Silicon Valley or Wall Street or Hollywood, yes, they got hijacked by cultural Marxists. And that's the reason why they're pushing what they're pushing. But within the public school system, the reason that they're producing ungrateful communists and the reason that they're producing people who keep thinking that government solutions are the only type of solutions is because the institution itself is oriented towards those type of outcomes, because it is a centralized government-run, one-size-fits-all mechanism. And part of the reason that we as conservatives push things like school choice so much is because we look at what could happen when you actually have a true marketplace of ideas. We've done Y minutes on this topic about why are school systems in New York City failing, but then the charter schools or the private schools, why do they not fail? Well, it's because they're not a centralized government-run system. And so, like, it's not just that, oh, well, bad teachers or bad administrators came in and took control of the system. Maybe in some cases. But no, the ultimate problem with the public school system is the public side of the public school system. You cannot get efficiency when you're using a DMV model. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you have the most, ideal, type of teachers, or you have the best type of administrators, or you have the best type of intentions. It's the same reason why, this gets back to another Y Minute that we did recently about how San Francisco had like a $2 million toilet. And then we talked about in that video how everybody was against it. Even the governor of California, a Democrat, was saying that, taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for $2 million. Nobody was campaigning for office on $2 million toilets, and yet they got one anyway. Yeah. Why? Because it was all contracted through the government. And at every stage in the process, you're going to get somebody who gets a cut from it, and you're going to get artificially inflated prices. Well, the same thing applies within education. Nobody wants 14 schools in Baltimore City schools having 0 students within those schools at reading level proficiency for their grade level. And yet we get it nonetheless. Nobody campaigns on that. Yeah. Nobody wants it. So why do we still have it? The reason that we still have it is because it is the nature of the system itself. It's not that we just have bad people. We do in some cases. The big problem that we have is the nature of the system.
Well, and I think, we get hammered for saying this, but I don't call them public schools a lot. I call them government schools. And people say, oh, well, that's telling. Yeah, because it's an accurate description. Let me ask you something. In a public park, can you go to a public park right now and make use of the public park? Yeah. Okay, great. So on a public road, can you drive on a public road? Yeah. What about a public sidewalk? Yeah, you can go that? Okay, what about other public buildings? Absolutely. You can go in, right? You have access to them. Can you go to a public school right now? Can you go to a public school and get some education right now? No, of course not. Can you go to a public school and observe what's going on? How about this? Can you go to a public school as a parent and have free access to observe what's going on with your children? No, you don't. Right? The reason why the reason why I call them government schools is because that's what they are. They are government run. They are government administered. The government decides the curriculum. The government employs the people. It's a government school. It's a government institution. All right. So it's going to operate like a government institution. And to Christian's point, you can put great teachers, you can put great people, great educators into that environment, and at some point, it is going to wear on them when they're forced to operate within a system that they see a bunch of flaws to, and they feel like nobody seems to be able to fix them. The biggest thing that I see with the charter schools, because I'll have some people say, well, the charter schools fail too. That's a great point. Let's be fair. Let's be intellectually honest. Private schools fail. Charter schools fail. Those things fail, right? Let me ask you a question. What happens when they fail? They go out of business. They no longer exist. The children go to a different school which succeeds, right? Unless it's a government-run school. You want to know what happens when a government-run school fails? They get more money.
Remember the Thomas Sowell quote?
Yeah.
There's nothing more dangerous and more stupid than, putting decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.
Yeah.
I might have butchered the quote just a little
No,
bit, that's the point.
Spot on. No, and that's what this comes down to is like, yes, you are right. Sometimes charter school fails. And when they do, they cease to exist. And when you fail, you get more money, and then you come back here and you tell me that the problem is you didn't have enough money or power. I mean, what an arrogant admission of failure on some level when you say, oh, well, the proof of that charter schools don't work is that some of them go out of business. Some of them fail. Well, if that's the criteria we're going to use to determine whether or not a system is succeeding, I've got bad news for you. But that never seems to be the conclusion. I hear the same thing too whenever we talk about dollars following students, where we say, look, we're going to make sure every kid gets, money for school. We're going to make sure that every kid has that. The government's going to subsidize it. And I will hear people say, but if you do that, you're going to take money away from the public school system, they mean the government school system. And so I always ask them, why? Why would you come to that conclusion? We haven't changed anything about the funding, the amount of dollars per student. It's just following the student into the school that they go into. Well, yeah, but if you do that and you give them an option, they might leave the public school. Oh, so let me get this straight. You're saying that if we put the focus on the funding for education with the student instead of the building, and they decide to leave that building or leave that system, you think what? The money should stay with the system? The money should stay with the building? It shouldn't follow the student? What's the purpose of the education funding then? At that point, it's not education, it's promoting a system. That's what you're funding. You're funding the promotion of a system. Because if you're so terrified that if you allowed a parent to take their child and the tax dollars they pay into in order to provide a different educational environment for their children, if you are so terrified that they would leave the system that you've put them in, that the only conclusion that you can come to is they can't be allowed to leave the system, what does that make you? Because it isn't an educator, and it certainly isn't an advocate for students. You're advocating for a system at the expense of those students. And you want government power to keep your funding going. And you want government power to force you to be able to have customers. You want captives. That's what you want. Because the bottom line is that if you really thought you were doing such a better job, if you really thought you were outperforming all of those charter schools, all of those private institutions, which you say are not producing the same product that you're capable of producing, you would welcome the competition, because what would end up happening is the people going to all those other schools would say, wait a second, if they're doing a better job, I'm going to go there. And the way you know this is true is because one of the biggest complaints that I will hear, and I hear it all the time, every session, well, these private schools get to select what students they get. The charter schools up in New York run a lottery. They don't get to special pick, and yet they still outperform the public schools. And yet, year after year, the government school lobbyists, the teachers' unions for the public school system always show up and oppose those kids being able to go to those other academic institutions. Again, at that point, you don't get to tell me this is all about education. All right, let me go ahead and wrap this up because we've been going, I think we went a little bit longer than we actually expected to. But I want to close it with this because Tina brought up a really good point that I think is important. I already know that this episode is just pissing off a ton of people. And some of the people I'm pissing off, I don't care. Let me just tell you right now, if you're someone that honestly believes that a child should be kept in a failing government system because it employs you, or because you lobby on behalf of it, or because you have some idea that that child belongs to that government system more than their parents, or that the system getting funded means more than that child's education being funded, I don't care if I piss you off. You're right. I am your opposition. And And I wear that with a badge of honor. However, if you're a public school teacher that is listening to this and you think that I'm just attacking you, please understand, I don't know you. I might be, if you're the sort of teacher that pushes some of the stuff that we've talked about. Yeah, I might be in opposition to you, because you know what's one thing I've learned? There are honorable professions. That doesn't mean that everybody that goes into that profession is honorable. I was a soldier. Some soldiers were really bad people. Some were great. Some were the bravest people I've ever met in my life, and it was an honor to have served with them. But I'm not going to take it for granted that simply because someone decides to serve, that they're automatically an up and up great person and the absolutely ideal of their profession. That's not how reality works. Teaching is a noble profession. Not all teachers are noble. Just like not all doctors. Certainly not all politicians. But if you are one of those teachers that is working hard in the public school because you have a passion for education and you want kids to learn, please understand, I am deeply sympathetic for the fact that you are operating within a system that I think more often than not doesn't appreciate you, doesn't pay you what you should get paid, and certainly doesn't offer you the sort of freedoms and opportunities that you should have in order to excel, because you excelling and doing your job well is what's good for kids. Because when you have a powerful teacher that comes on the scene and ignites a sense of wonder and commitment to the idea of not only knowledge, but wisdom, that can be a life-changing experience, especially for some children that don't get it anywhere else. It's that teacher, it's that coach, it's whoever else. That is the most positive adult role models they have in their life. And I will tell you right now, I think you are doing the Lord's work. And it is the height of nobility within that profession in order to be able to do that. And so please understand something. I am not denigrating you. I do have some problems with the system that you find yourself probably having to operate in order to make a living. And please understand that you operating within and trying to do the best within a bad situation is not something that I blame you for at all, because so many of the things that you're having to endure are decisions being made by people that have never been in your shoes and probably never will be. And that's part of the problem. Not only do I want a more open educational model for children, I want it for teachers too. Because I've also seen the benefits of what happens when a good teacher is unleashed from the shackles of a government system that is constantly wasting not only the kids' times, but the teacher's time by forcing them to do things and engage in things that make absolutely no sense. So I want you to have the sort of freedom that you should have within your occupation to be able to do the best for your students and to get compensated appropriately. Because I'll tell you this much, I don't know many parents that would pick their school off the number of high-priced administrators working there. I know a lot of parents that would pick their schools if it meant that their child would have an opportunity to get that one great teacher that could be the difference. So please know, I mean you no ill will, nor do I mean to discourage you in wanting to educate, in wanting to be able to provide that function for a student and to be properly taken care of as you should be for doing it well. But I'm not going to sit here and prop up a system that I do think is failing. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And the way, and again, the telltale sign to me that everyone kind of knows that there's something wrong with this is that you're really not given options. Sure, if you can afford them, you can have the options. What happens if you can't? You still got to pay the taxes. And this is just the best we can do. And the only solution is more money. Because if you look at education spending over the last several decades, and not just higher ed, but within our public school system as well, what you're going to find is the funding has almost consistently gone up year over year. There's been dips from time to time, no question. But if you look at the average funding per pupil within our school system, it has gone up exponentially, higher than inflation, almost every single year. So I'm sorry, at some point, I stopped believing that this is just a funding issue. This is, as Christian pointed out, the nature of the sort of system that we've created. And I think it needs to be changed. The other thing I want to do is I want to tell people out there as well, because Tina mentioned this point, and I think it's important we put it in the conclusion as well. Homeschooling is not just the end all be all where it's like, oh, once I start homeschooling, it's all going to be good. I will promise you that there are people that do a horrible job homeschooling. Mm-hmm. There are some people that pull their kids out of the public school, not because they legitimately want to homeschool, but because they don't want the accountability that the public school system is actually providing and actually trying to do a good job by their children. And really, that's not homeschooling. It's a form of abuse. Like, I'm aware of that. But I think we should deal with it as abuse, not suggest that the only way that we can properly address this situation is with government monopolization of education and the tax dollars spent for it. So please understand, there are bad homeschool parents. There are bad parents who claim to homeschool when really, again, all they're trying to do is avoid any sort of accountability because they're too lazy to get their kid on the bus on time. That happens, but it needs to be dealt with for what it is, not used as a prop for a system which has some very, very fundamental flaws with it. For all the parents out there that are wondering, maybe you're someone that has been absolutely convinced that you don't have the credentials to do this, or this is not something you could ever do. Here's what I want to say. Maybe you don't have the personality type for this, or maybe you're in a financial situation where you just can't do it. I understand that. Please understand, we're not saying that if you don't homeschool your kids, they're going to be failures and you're a horrible parent. I'm not saying that at all. I know a lot of parents that they don't have another option and they do everything they can to continue to pour into their child's life and education, and they do an excellent job and they got great kids. I know other people that have chosen the public school system because there are certain resources there that they can't replicate in another environment, and they are doing their best to counteract some of the bad things that happen within that system in order to give their kids the benefits of those resources provided. Again, I understand that. Those are still great parents. Being a homeschool parent doesn't mean you're a great parent. Being a homeschool parent doesn't mean you care more about your kids than somebody doing something else. But here's what I will say. The public school system has gotten progressively worse over the last couple of decades, significantly worse. And if you are judging the public school system now based off of what you experienced 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's the point where I'm going to ask you to please take a step back and consider updating the information that you have available to you. Don't do it just because it's the way it's always been done. You're going to need to ask hard questions, and you're going to need to come to some conclusions with respect to your goals for your children, for your family, on what is the best course of action to take. Maybe it is staying in the public school system. Maybe it is. Maybe it's doing some sort of co-op. Maybe it's private school. Maybe it's homeschooling. Maybe it's some sort of other model. What I want you to know is that you should not feel like you were trapped into one system and one system only. And anybody that is trying to make you feel guilty for leaving that system might have an agenda that goes well beyond the well-being of your children. But I don't want anyone to think that I'm sitting in here in a very judgmental tone, because I know I can do that sometimes. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes. And suggesting that if you didn't do it the same way Tina and I did it, you're a bad parent. That's not the case. But I do desperately want parents to be able to make the decision that is best for their children with all of the knowledge available. And quite frankly, a lot of the institutions that you should be able to rely upon to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly with respect to what is actually going on are not doing it because they have an interest to keep it from you. And that's not hypothetical, and that's not hyperbolic, because I've sat there in the debates. I've sat there in the committee meetings. I've sat there on the floor. I've seen the legislation. I've seen the reports. I've seen what's going on. I generally have access to information that most parents are probably just not going to be able to find or have access to by the very nature of my position serving as a legislator. So nobody gets to tell me it's not happening. And nobody gets to tell me that the trend isn't going in a direction that I think most parents would find appalling. So just please go into it eyes wide open. If you think homeschooling is for you, I'm telling you right now, you're going to be shocked at the number of resources that are available. If you want to find some other option, I'm telling you, you're going to be shocked at the number of resources available. If you're going to stay within the public school model because you believe that the benefits outweigh the costs, that may be true. That may be true for your child and their goals. It may be true for their objectives. It may be true for the school district that you're in. I don't know, and so therefore I'm not casting judgment on your decision. But please go in knowing exactly what is going on. Please do that much. And if you have and you've made this decision, God bless you. God bless your decision. I hope your child has a wonderful education, and I hope you continue to maintain that wonderful relationship, because all of that is still possible. All of that is still possible. But I hope, if nothing else, in kind of a sarcastic tone, which I'm somewhat known for, and hopefully in a humorous one, and at times a very serious and intense one, we've at least kind of put to bed some of the what we think are more ridiculous arguments. Because one of the things I will tell you, if you think that we've been overly snarky this entire time, That I might guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. But I will tell you this, as a homeschool parent, sometimes we also get frustrated with some of the, let's just say, accusations in the form of questions that we get a lot. And so every once in a while, it makes us feel good to fire back and say, oh, you want to ask that question? Well, great. We're going to expose some things on the other side. And now you get to consider some hard questions that everyone seems to think are perfectly acceptable to ask us. Okay. Well, now they're asked back. What are you going to do with that information? Because ultimately, this is not about us. It's not about you. It's about our kids. And hopefully doing what is the best for them spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, physically, and ultimately professionally. Because at some point, they're going to go out and they're going to have to operate in this world. And the world's getting a little bit crazier than I think any of us grew up in. And we want them to be adequately prepared for it. So we hope you found this helpful, maybe thought-provoking. Once again, we want to thank you all for watching, and we will see you next episode.